Hey everyone, so today I want to go through some crappie techniques that I like to use pretty much all year round, but especially right now in mid-April, we've got crappies are transitioning. You still have crappies that are out on structure, and you have some now that are moving up into the shallow parts of lakes and ponds. You'll see a lot more move up now in the ponds just because they're going to warm up a little bit quicker. Because our weather has fluctuated so much lately, you got a lot of these fish that are in the 10 to 20 foot range. So I'm going to show you guys a couple techniques that I like to use year round. The first one I'm going to talk about is just casting for crappies. So what I like to use, I'm just going to talk about my rod and reel setups first. First thing I've got here for a rod, this is the cherry wood from Berkeley. So the nice thing about the cherry wood is it's a very durable rod. It's an ultralight rod, and when I'm fishing for crappies, I want to use ultralight most of the time just because it allows me to feel the bite a little bit better and fight the fish better. It makes it a little bit more exciting, and the cherry wood's a great price point basically for any angler. I think these run anywhere $30, $35 maybe for a rod. So great rod for the price. And for the reel, most reels I run are Fluger Presidents. To me, for the price and for the quality, it's just my favorite reel. Now, I know everybody's got their preferences, but that's my go-to. On this one, I'm actually running Abu Garcia Black Max, and it's actually been treating me pretty good lately, so no complaints there. For line, I'm going to run light line on all my reels, especially crappie reels. So 4 to 6 pound is what I'm going to be running. This one's 6 pound mono. Most of my rods I'm going to be running a fluoro leader as well, which anywhere to 6 to 8 pounds on my fluoro leader. So I'm running monofilament on my crappie rods. I do have one set up here I'll show you in a second that's nano braid, which is new to me this season. The first time I've tried it, so I'll talk about that here shortly. The jig that I'm throwing here is a Charlie Brewer's crappie slider, and I've got that just on a pink jig head here. And I'll show you here in a few minutes what I like to use for plastics. When I'm casting for crappies, especially in the spawn, when they moved up into the shallow, I'm just casting straight out and on the shorelines there. So I use two different techniques that seem to work really well for me. I'm going to cast out and keep my rod tip extra high. The reason being is that lets that bait stay a little bit higher in the water column. And if you fish for crappies on a regular basis, you notice that they like to suspend a lot of times. And we get into a lot of crappies that are 3 to 5 feet down below the water surface. So if you're keeping that rod tip low the entire time, you might be going underneath that school and might miss out on some of those fish. So I like to keep my rod tip high and then just reel it back nice and slow. You can mix the cadences up and you'll figure out what the fish wants once you get a few bites. It seems like if I have my rod tip high and I'm going slow, that's typically my most successful cadence for fishing for crappies. Another thing I like to do, especially if I'm out on the boat and I'm casting for crappies, if we've identified a school, we'll anchor up and I'll cast out into that school and I'll just let that jig sit for a second. So rather than casting out and reeling right away, I'll cast out, let that jig sit to where it's going to get down, 3 to 5 feet, get in front of their faces, and then reel back slow. And sometimes if I'm trying to find the bite, that's the difference maker, just letting that jig sit. And don't close your bail right away. Cast out, keep that bail open while you're waiting, close it, then reel. And that seems to be a difference maker for me. Just real quickly here, I'm going to show you guys some of the plastics I like to use. Like I said before, to me, Charlie Brewer's stuff is time and time again the best stuff for me when it comes to catching crappies. You'll see I've got lots of different colors here. Depends on the time and conditions. Time and time again though, my best producer is the all white. I have a lot of these with a chartreuse tail on them, and I do like that touch of chartreuse, especially if I'm targeting a couple different species. That allows me to pick up walleye and wipers as well. I'll talk a little bit about these socky jigs and these tracer baits and the brush pile of plastics here in a few minutes when I talk about slip bobbering. So if you guys have any questions about that setup, that's the first one I like to run. I'm going to go into the other technique I like to use if I'm crappie fishing. This one I don't love as much, but it can produce a lot more fish, especially in times like right now where the fish are finicky. And that would be fishing with a float. All right, so a slip bobber setup where you can sit right on top of fish, or you can keep it right in front of their face for a period of time. The first setup I talked about, you're reeling that in, you're expecting that fish to give a little bit of a chase to hit that bait. Whereas with the slip bobber setup, you're maintaining, eye contact basically with that crappie, and you're waiting for that fish to get irritated and attack that bait, and you can keep it in the strike zone a lot longer. So if you've got fish that are really tight to a structure, especially like brush where you might lose some jigs casting into it, the slip bobber setup's a great way where you can get real tight to that structure and catch fish on a regular basis. And the other great thing with a slip bobber is you can get it right in the strike zone. So I'm going to show you just a couple of the pieces I like to use for my slip bobber setup. So once again, I've got an ultralight rod. This is a Defy Silver made by 13 Fishing. Once again, not a bad price point on this one. It's 7 foot long. It's a ultra fast tip, and this one runs about $50 to $60, I believe. On here right now, I've just got a nice little underspin by Saki. Sean Tran at Saki Jigs got that, makes that one. It's a nice one. So that's my rod setup here for the slip bobber, and this is the one that I'm running that nano braid. All right, so the advantages to a nano braid is a smaller diameter, thickness, and casting capabilities. So like I said, this is my first season using the nano braid. What I've noticed so far is I do really like the sensitivity, and I can cast some micro jigs, it seems like, further than I would with mono. So those are the advantages of nano braids so far. Some things I worry about is just the wind, tangles, things of that nature. I will tell you, running slip bobbers on nano braid hasn't been a problem because they're on the line. But if you're running a clip-on bobber, it seems like that nano braids, because of the thinness of the diameter of the line, I've had a tough time with springs. It seems to work through the springs and comes off a little bit easier. So something to keep in mind if you're looking at nano braid. If I'm running a slip bobber setup, you've got your typical bobber stops like these. I do have the rubber ones, which I prefer. David Weiner turned me on to those, and those seem to work better for me. But this is just a typical string bobber, or bobber stop, my bad. When you're using a bobber, you want to make sure you use something small. These Stella bobbers are nice bobbers. You don't want something too big because you just want to be able to detect that bite. Something small will work fine for you. Then you're going to use a barrel swivel. And then if you're going to go live bait presentation, just a snelled hook works great. Or just a little bit of a leader line. It doesn't need to be too long, maybe 8 inches or so. And then you tie your jig to that. So some jigs that I like to use for the slip bobber setup, something small. I want it to be a micro jig. It's going to be similar to an ice fishing presentation, but something small. So I've got a couple different setups here. This is a Saki Firefly. Pink is a great color for when it comes to crappie fishing. Pink and white are probably my go-to. And in the cloudier conditions, this is a little bit of a brown fly here. Both those also made by Saki Fishing. Both those are great setups when it comes to slip bobber fishing for crappies. The other one that I like to go to is a mini mite. So these mini mites is just a little jig with a little bit of a plastic with a little tail action here on the back. And also one just a little bit bigger size here. So these are just smaller presentations that you can keep in front of the crappie and doesn't scare them off. It's a pretty finesse tactic. And if you're twitching your bobber back, which a lot of people like to do, they cast it out, twitch it back just to give that little hop or that little bit of action. Crappie tracers. Okay, this one's made by Fishing Assault. Just the action here on the tail is great when you're just finessing crappie. Or another one that's great is brush pile. So brush pile plastics as well. Take a look at those two. One thing I do want to mention when it comes to that first technique of casting into crappies is your jig head. Make sure you're using a small jig head. My go-to would be some sort of underspin. So Roadrunner jig heads are my favorite with a little bit of an underspin, like a willow blade. Right here on this slider, you'll see I've got this Roadrunner here. It's a little bit of a willow blade here, and it's actually a little bit bigger than I usually use. But I just like fishing, especially when it comes to time for spawn and when crappies get aggressive. That little bit of extra flash seems like it gets a little bit more fish for me. So everybody's got their preferences, but that's what works out for me. Hopefully you guys learned a few things or some things that you might try this spring for crappie fishing. Should be good here in a few more weeks. If you guys have any questions, feel free to let me know. Please comment, subscribe, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video.